Hi, welcome back. This is FSX 404 and welcome to the VOR navigation. VOR navigation is one of the toughest lessons to explain because VORs are just too complex to explain. So I'm not going to get into how the VOR works, except that the VOR sends 360-degree radials from it, which VOR nav equipment inside the airplane will pick up and use to navigate. I've thought about what the best way is to explain this lesson, and I've broken it down into 4 lessons. The first one will be tuning, identifying, and flying to the VOR. The second is going to be flying a specific heading to a VOR. The third is going to be flying a vector from the VOR. And the final VOR lesson will be VOR triangulation, which is also my very favorite thing about flight. To make this tutorial easier to understand, I will use a LAX VFR terminal chart from skyvector.com. So thank you, SkyVector. So let's get into it. For the first lesson of tuning in, identifying, and flying to the VOR, I will set up the airplane a few miles northwest of the LAX VOR. Then I will tune in the LAX VOR into our nav1, and once the VOR is tuned in and identified, we'll find out the heading we need to fly to get to the LAX VOR. Then we'll turn the airplane and fly it to the VOR. The first thing we will look at is a typical VOR layout on the chart. The VOR is usually marked on the aeronautical chart as a hexagon with a point in the center of it, although sometimes, like Santa Monica VOR, are just marked by a little circle. The information about the VOR is inscribed inside a blue rectangle next to the VOR. The upper line in the rectangle is the name of the VOR, Los Angeles. On the lower line, you have a frequency of 113.6. Then you have something that says channel 83. Now this is only used by the military, so we're not going to worry about that. And the last part consists of 3 letters, LAX, and then a bunch of lines and dots behind it. The lines and dots are actually the Morse code for the letters of the VOR, in this case LAX. The Morse code is used to identify the VOR. Even the navigational aids in the Microsoft Flight Simulator use the same exact Morse codes, which are always noted on the VOR or other navigational aids in Microsoft Flight Simulator. One thing to remember is that this is a VOR navigational lesson. We'll use only VORs to navigate. We will not use any DMEs or GPS equipment, so you can forget about looking at the DME equipment. There are ways of knowing when you have reached the VOR, and we'll go over it in a little bit. Okay, so I've set up the airplane somewhere northwest of the LAX VOR. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to tune in the frequency of 113.6 in nav1 of our plane. Once the VOR frequency is tuned in, we'll identify it. We'll listen to the Morse code and we'll make sure that it corresponds to the dots and dashes on the chart. And once we have identified the VOR, we'll turn the VOR heading bug until the needle is centered. Once the needle is centered, the first thing we're going to look at is the little triangle on the VOR. This little triangle indicates whether this heading on the VOR will take us to or will take us from the VOR. If the triangle is pointing down like it is right now, the heading of 276 will take us from or away from the VOR. So since the heading of 276 will take us away from the VOR, we'll keep turning the VOR heading bug until the needle is centered again and the triangle is pointing up or to the VOR. Okay, so now the needle is centered and the triangle is pointing up or to the VOR, and the heading on the VOR is 095. So we'll turn our airplane to a heading of 095. As we're turning, you can see that the VOR needle is moving, but that's only because we are close to the VOR, so our direction to it is changing as we're moving. We're not going to worry about that right now. All we're going to do is turn to a heading of 095. Once we have turned to a heading of 095, we'll recenter the needle, make sure that the triangle is still pointing up or to the VOR, and then look at the new heading. The heading now reads 086. So we'll just turn our airplane to a new heading of 086. If this was a perfect day without wind, the heading of 086 will take us straight to the VOR. But this is rarely the case. So what we're going to do is we'll fly a heading for a while, and then we'll look at the needle and adjust our heading to compensate for the wind. It is very important that we pick a heading and we fly it. We do not want to be chasing the needle all over the place. The closer we get to the VOR, the needle will move more and it will move faster. So what's going to happen is that once we are close to the VOR, we'll pick a final heading and keep it until we overfly the VOR. We know that we are over the VOR when the little triangle on the VOR flips and the needle centers for 2 to 3 seconds. Okay, so the triangle just flipped and the needle just centered, so I'm going to pause the game. And let's look outside. And as you can see, we are right over the VOR. That right there under the airplane is the VOR. So we did good this time.